At 04:30 a.m. on October 3, 2025, the skies over eastern Ukraine erupted into chaos. 35 missiles, including Russia's most advanced Iskander ballistics, alongside 60 screaming drones, converged on a single target just 40 miles from the Russian border. This wasn't a routine strike. This was the largest aerial bombardment of the year, designed to cripple Ukraine's energy infrastructure and plunge millions into a frozen winter nightmare. But here's what Moscow didn't know. They weren't attacking a gas facility. They were attacking a phantom, hidden in the misty. Fields of the Pava Oblast sat a masterwork of military deception, an image $500,000 inflatable decoy so convincing that Russia's most sophisticated guidance systems couldn't tell the difference. Fake compressor stations, heat emitters blazing at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, creating thermal signatures identical to the real thing. Meanwhile, 7 miles away, Ukraine's actual $2 billion gas hub, the lifeline keeping the nation's lights on, remained completely invisible under adaptive camouflage netting. The question burning through everyone's mind: why would Ukraine risk letting $200 million worth of Russian firepower get this close? Because survival was never the endgame. Ukraine was setting a trap so devastating, so perfectly calibrated, that Russia's own attack would become the instrument of its destruction. 45 seconds that changed everything. At 04:15 a.m., Ukrainian command centers lit up in crimson panic. Every monitoring system screamed the same terrifying message. The entire Russian barrage had locked onto the real gas hub. The decoys had failed. Russia's heat-seeking technology was brutally effective. It targeted the hottest signature available, and right now, that was the genuine facility worth billions. Then Ukraine sprang the counter-trap. 50 modified DJI quadcopters rose from concealed positions across the fields. These weren't weapons. They were thermal lures, each one equipped with heat emitters deliberately engineered to burn hotter and brighter than the actual gas infrastructure. On tactical displays, the impossible happened. The entire missile swarm began turning, pulled off course like moths to a flame, redirecting toward the decoy site. The lure worked flawlessly until nature intervened. Thick fog scattered the quadcopter signals just enough for 10 slower Shahed drones to lose the false target. Flying blind through the mist, one drone made contact no analyst could have predicted. It clipped a pressure valve on the real pipeline, triggering a fireball that would eventually cost $5 million in repairs. But in Belgorod, the Russian commander watching his drone feeds made a catastrophic miscalculation. Seeing that fireball erupt on his screens, he assumed total victory. Believing he'd crushed Ukraine's energy network, he ordered the deployment of his most powerful electronic warfare weapon to finish off what he thought were desperate remnants. At 04:17 a.m., silence swallowed the battlefield. A $50 million Krasuka 4 jamming system roared to life, flooding a 20-mile radius with electromagnetic chaos. Ukrainian radio links disintegrated into static. Video feeds from the DJI quadcopters vanished as the drones tumbled uselessly from the sky. To Russian forces, the battle was over. Victory was theirs. They had no idea they'd just activated Ukraine's secret weapon. For months, Ukrainian recovery teams had been salvaging crashed Russian Shahed drones from battlefields, reverse engineering their systems, and rebuilding them into something Moscow never anticipated: weapons that would hunt their creators. These were the Fiber Phantoms, 20 reprogrammed, Shaheds connected by hair-thin fiber optic cables that couldn't be jammed because you can't jam light itself. While the Krasuka jammer obliterated all radio signals, it simultaneously provided perfect cover for the Phantoms. The skies were cleared of witnesses. Hugging terrain at barely 30 feet, this ghost army streaked toward Belgorod completely undetected. Inside the Russian command post, confusion turned to panic. Despite maximum jamming power, the commander's radar display had become a chaotic mess of false returns from the burning decoy explosions. He was blind. Through the electronic storm, he thought he detected movement. In desperation, he issued his final order: fire everything. The S-400 batteries, which moments ago believed the fight was finished, now struggled to reacquire targets amid self-created radar chaos. At 04:18 a.m., Russian air defense systems began launching million-dollar missiles at ghosts, at the smoldering wreckage of inflatable decoys they'd already destroyed. Their sophisticated fire control computers, designed to track 100 targets simultaneously, entered a state of digital breakdown, attempting to assign threat priorities to targets that flickered in and out of existence. State-of-the-art. Technology was now wasting multi-million-dollar ordnance to pulverize burning rubber in an empty field. But one real threat slipped through the chaos. A single KH-101 cruise missile that broke from the initial lure, screaming toward the actual gas hub. 7 miles away, American-supplied NASAMS batteries with crystal-clear targeting went to work. 2 AMRAAM missiles leaped from their launchers at Mach 4. The KH-101 vanished in a surgical fireball before it ever got close, and the entire Russian fireworks display over that empty field? It provided perfect cover. Flying low and silent beneath the chaos, the 20 fiber Phantoms used rolling hills to mask their final approach into Belgorod. They were now 43 seconds from impact. In his command post, the Russian commander watched his S-400s hitting something, saw massive secondary explosions lighting up the sky, and reported resounding success to his superiors. He had no idea the fireworks he was celebrating were masking the approach of drones about to erase his launch site from existence. At 04:19 a.m., it wasn't radar that spotted the threat. It was a terrified Russian soldier on the ground. Through a break in the fog, he saw a dark shape moving impossibly fast and low. Then another, and another. His frantic radio transmission confirmed the impossible. The attack wasn't over. It was just beginning. Russia's last line of defense roared to life. Pantsir missile systems, point-blank bodyguards with 12-mile engagement ranges capable of swatting jets from the sky, began firing wildly into the mist. But the Pantsir's radar was searching for electronic signatures. The fiber Phantoms had none. To Russia's advanced defense systems, they were completely invisible. The commander's voice cracked with rage and disbelief. Manual override. Fire at anything that moves. Inside the Pantsir vehicle, the gunner slammed the override switch. His optical sights were useless, a blurry mess of fog and strobing explosions. He was reduced to hunting shadows, trying to lead a target moving at 170 feet per second with a joystick. Cannon fire ripped holes in dirt 100 yards behind Phantoms already changing direction. Every shot was a prayer against physics, pure desperation. A few Phantoms fell to lucky shots in the frantic barrage, but it was like stopping a tidal wave with a bucket. 14 were still coming. The lead Phantom's camera locked onto its target. An Iskander launch vehicle, missile tube gaping open, crew scrambling to reload. 22 seconds to impact. The drone severed its fiber optic tether. Its warhead armed. At 04:20 a.m., Russia's fatal doctrinal flaw became devastatingly apparent. A 50-ton Iskander launch vehicle, a mobile fortress, becomes completely helpless during the 15 seconds it takes to reload a missile. Crew exposed, fuel unprotected, a sitting duck, and the fiber Phantoms had just found an entire flock. The first Phantom didn't target the launcher itself. That's inefficient. It struck the 1,000-pound hydrazine fuel tanker parked beside it. The 90-pound warhead turned the tanker into a massive fireball. The chain reaction was instantaneous. The second explosion wasn't another drone. It was ammunition on the neighboring launch vehicle cooking off from intense heat. The battlefield flipped in microseconds. The hunters had become the hunted. The very missiles Russia launched at Ukraine's gas infrastructure created the perfect smokescreen for drones now systematically dismantling their own base. Russia was being annihilated by its own reprogrammed weapons under cover of its own self-inflicted chaos. Back in his command post, the Russian commander's screen, which moments ago showed him a successful strike in Ukraine, now displayed the live feed of his own launch site being torn apart piece by piece. His flawless victory had become a column of black smoke rising from his own territory. Phantom number 1 didn't just explode. It unleashed a physics lesson from hell. The 90-pound high-explosive warhead's shrapnel, moving at 5,000 feet per second, acted like a million tiny matches, instantly igniting the 1,000 pounds of hydrazine rocket fuel. But the real killer was the Monroe effect. In a microsecond, the warhead's copper liner forged into a needle-thin jet of molten metal, a supersonic scalpel moving at 23,000 feet per second, punching through 6 inches of hardened armor like cardboard. The pressure wave from the first kill, a staggering 20,000 psi, crumpled the neighboring launch vehicle like a tin can just before its own. Sympathetic detonation cooked off. Then the next phantom hit, and the next. In less than 10 seconds, 14 separate strikes turned a $400 million launch site into a scrapyard, sending a 300-foot column of black smoke into the morning sky. What did the battlefield look like the morning after Russia threw a $200 million punch and mostly hit itself? Satellite imagery told the complete story. In Ukraine, damage was minimal, a $5 million scorch mark on a single compressor, with Naftogaz reporting 95% capacity still online. There would be no winter blackout, but across the border in Belgorod, catastrophe. A $400 million launch site reduced to a smoldering junkyard. Russia lost 25 of its 35 missiles and 50 of its 60 drones, all for a single glancing blow. This was never just about destroying infrastructure. It was deliberate terror designed to freeze millions of Ukrainian civilians in darkness. But the plan backfired spectacularly. Not only did Ukraine's gas grid hold, but the failed attack handed them the perfect opportunity for devastating retaliation. An eye for an eye. Ukraine's gas for Russia's missiles and launch capabilities. The loss of the Belgorod launch site created a logistical nightmare, forcing Russia to pull remaining Iskanders deeper into its own territory. The moment smoke cleared, the propaganda war began. Moscow called it a technical glitch, their tired excuse. Except you can't argue with crystal-clear satellite images of a burning Russian base splashed across every news channel from CNN to Kyiv. The myth of an invincible Russian arsenal went up in smoke. President Zelensky called it a failed act of sabotage. The West responded by unlocking another $500 million in military aid. This brings us to the final strategic checkmate. The attack forced Putin into a nightmare dilemma: protect launch sites deep in the rear or protect troops on the front lines. He can't do both. Every S-400 system pulled back to defend. Bases creates another gaping hole in the sky over Donbass. Another open door for Ukrainian F-16s and ATACMS missiles. This is the new doctrine of warfare. Ukraine is riding in real time. A low-cost asymmetric trap just drained Russia's war chest and threw its entire offensive strategy into chaos. The bear poked the beehive and discovered the swarm stings back harder than anyone imagined. Modern warfare isn't about who has the biggest arsenal anymore. It's about who can turn their enemy's strength into their fatal weakness.